Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to welcome you to VMware's campus and the opening of our brand new campus here in Palo Alto for this discussion about the state of Silicon Valley. I'm Oliver Roll, and I look after the communications team here at VMware. So today is a pretty big celebration for us. It's the opening of our spectacular new campus. Later on this afternoon, we have many of our friends from the community, our partners, our customers joining us, and everyone's going to help us cut the opening ribbon. So a few facts about our new home. We're part of the Stanford Research Park, and we're fortunate enough to have 100 of their 700 acres. There are 17 buildings, and those buildings are going to be home to about 6,000 employees. We're LEED certified, and we have hundreds of photovoltaic panels that basically divert about 600 metric tons of carbon every year, which is the equivalent of taking 125 cars off the road. It's a pretty nice place for a stroll as well, or for a run. There are 1,500 trees. 75 of those trees are palm trees, and there's also a fruit orchard. So all in all, this is a pretty cool place for us to be. And we're in the heart of Silicon Valley. So what better way to celebrate our opening than to invite 5 industry luminaries to have a discussion with us about the state of Silicon Valley. So we're delighted to welcome co-founder and CEO of Andreessen Horowitz, Marc Andreessen. We have Dave DeWalt, the CEO of FireEye. John Hennessy, the president of Stanford University, Joe Tucci, EMC's chairman and CEO, and our very own VMware chief executive, Pat Gelsinger. And to host our discussion all the way from the studios in New York, we have Melissa Lee from CNBC, who is the host of CNBC Fast Money and CNBC Options Action. You can follow the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is VMWSOTS. And after today's event, we'll have a video of the whole discussion on VMware's corporate blog site. So it's a real pleasure to have you all here. Thank you for spending the time with us this afternoon. Thank you to the panel for being here. And with that, Melissa, over to you.
It is my honor to be here. Thanks for having me, to be up here with 5 luminaries of technology. We should know just order of business here. We'll have our discussion for about 45 minutes, and then we'll open it up to questions. So we do hope that you will be listening, and if you have questions, save them for the end, and we'll try and get to them. But let's start off with the beautiful new campus, Pat. This is a real bet that Silicon Valley is going to be the place for innovation for the foreseeable future. Do you see it that way? Are there competitor Silicon Valleys out there?
Well, unquestionably, other areas look at Silicon Valley with envy, with aspirations to be like what we are. In other areas, Israel, other areas in the US, other countries desire that. But Silicon Valley is unique. And not only are we founded here, we have our heritage outside of Stanford, right? We see this as just a fabulous community, right? With our announcement here today. But this is the center of innovation for IT. It was, it is, and we expect it to continue to be into the future. And because of our campus opening today, we're putting our flag here that we're a permanent part of the Silicon Valley fabric today and into the future.
Marc, you've said in the past that you think that there are going to be other centers of innovation for different industries. Are we seeing that right now? Can you point to an example of that happening for a specific industry where we're actually seeing the innovation driven, not necessarily here, maybe even not necessarily in the United States?
Yeah, so there's sort of 2 ways to look at kind of the idea that there should be a lot of Silicon Valleys. And there should be a lot of Silicon Valleys. I mean, the more Silicon Valleys in the world, the more kind of hubs of innovation and startup activity, the better, for all of us. And so they should happen everywhere. There's sort of 2 ways of looking at it. One is, how do you get another Silicon Valley building the same kinds of companies that we build? So software and internet and mobile and all these things. And there's a lot of activity in Shanghai and Stockholm and Tel Aviv and other places. And so there is a certain amount of that. But there's another idea, or there's another model, which would be, instead of having Silicon Valley, how about having, in another city, how about having Biotech Valley? And how about having 3D Printing Valley? And how about having Genomics Valley? And how about having Drone Valley? Self-driving car valley? Like, there's all these different areas of technology, broader than what Silicon Valley does, that are ripe for reinvention and ripe for the Silicon Valley mentality to be brought to them. And by the way, there are many other research universities, and Stanford is, probably the best university in the world. My adoptive.
Probably about
my adoptive. Well, I did go somewhere else, but I like to believe I would have been. I could have gone to Stanford. But there are many other great research universities, and there are many great researchers at those universities working on amazing technologies. And so I think you could have 50, sort of valleys of X. And I think that there are examples. I think what's happening in New York around, finance innovation, and what's happening around e-commerce is very impressive. LA, there's sort of an entertainment technology revolution happening in LA. Our company Oculus, has made big waves. Is an LA company that brings together both kind of computer science and entertainment media. There's actually a tremendous amount of very interesting stem cell work happening in South Korea, in Seoul, as an example. And so I think there's a long list of areas in which we could have Silicon Valleys all over the world.
I guess the question though is will America continue to be the center for innovation? Joe, I'm just curious what you think if the great ideas, the next big companies are still going to be here in the United States, or will we start increasingly hearing about them coming from China or Europe?
Well, I think they will come from China. Europe is a trickier issue. It's not a community that embraces risk and the willingness to be entrepreneurial as strong as the United States and as strong as the Valley. I think the real magic about the Valley has been its ability to reinvent itself. It started in the disk business, then went the semiconductor business, then the personal computer business, then the mobile and wireless business, and of course the software business. That's the key. Nobody's yet managed to figure out how to do that, and that sense of innovation, being willing to jump into new things and move, that's the real special event. And that's harder to replicate, but I think we'll see it. And in China, certainly, you see this entrepreneurial drive. They certainly have a talent base. They have all the magic. Whether or not they can be as welcoming as the Valley has been. And the Valley is a really magic place. You can come from anywhere in the world, find people who like to do what you do, find food of the kind you like, and be welcomed. That food is very important. And be welcomed, and be part of the community, and it's a meritocracy. That's magic. That really is magic.
Things are getting very expensive here, though, when it comes to
That's
property,
our challenge.
when it comes to taxes. Dave and Joe, I'm sure both of you can answer this, but are you finding it more difficult to attract talent when there are other options in other states, in other burgeoning sort of tech industries?
You're here.
I think it's really important to be mindful of all the human capital that we now have around the world, because a lot of ways, many people here in Silicon Valley are immigrants. I remember driving my car across the country. You reminded me of this, 1986. I drove my little car across the country, grew up in Pennsylvania, and it was a land of opportunity here in Silicon Valley.
Oh, another good Pennsylvania boy. I didn't know that. Yeah. That's very good, very good.
We'll talk later.
Eagles fan.
Eagles fan. But what was amazing was this was the place to be, and I think in many ways it still is. It's just this amazing magnet that's happening here. But if you're going to really be mindful of talent around the world, there's so many other amazing places where they have the eye of the tiger. They want to learn. They want to succeed. They're finally seeing money and growth out of their class to the next class. And if you can leverage that emotional sort of EQ and really drive that, there's great talent all over the world. We see it in Ireland right now. We see it in the Middle East. We've seen it in Northern Asia. If you can harness that, you can do great things.
Joe, is it increasingly harder and harder to find the right talent here?
It's really interesting. This is a magnet for talent. So in cases, is it harder? I'm sure it's more competitive. I'm the token guy from Boston here. But
you can't tell.
Yeah.
I didn't wear a tie.
He's my boss, so I let him on, so what can I say?
See? But I say yes, it's definitely getting more competitive. And you see most of the companies of size and scope, like Dave was just saying, have pockets of innovation and startup areas that they're doing around the world. But this is still going to be a hotbed, and it's by no means peaked out. And I think you're going to see great things. I think, as John said, it just keeps reinventing itself amazingly. But I will tell you, the rest of the world is studying this through a microscope. And I can tell you, I participate on a council in Boston that's trying to say, what can we learn? And it's never, what do we learn about any place else in the world? It's what do we learn that Silicon Valley has done well that we can replicate here. And to Boston's credit, I think John would agree. In the biotech area, if you take that one vertical, I mean, Marc brought this up, I think Boston now actually is edged a bit ahead. Okay. So these things can be replicated. It's not super magic.
John, what would you tell a state or city who wants to be the next Silicon Valley, particularly if they have a strong university there as well? Like in Boston, you've got so many talented people there, students. What would you tell them? How do they replicate the success that we're finding here?
So I think it begins, the university is sort of a hub for generating new innovation, but it really requires the talent pool to come in. I think proximity matters. I think the distance between Stanford and so much of the Valley really does help. You think, well, that's not really important. It is really important. And then I think being able to import people. I mean, the magic about California is you walk down the street, you can see people from all over the world. And Boston's getting increasingly like that, although many people who come to Boston can't understand the accent. So there's a challenge there to be faced up to. But that's really where it has to come.
Now, don't you think Google Glass is going to be able to translate that?
There's an app for that.
Yeah, so I think all those things have to come together, but I think they can come together, and there are obviously other great universities around the world.
The thing that we can't duplicate is your weather. That's a huge.
So the weather helps. The weather does help.
Doesn't hurt.
I was just going to add something, Melissa, because Marc and I were talking about this earlier. I just came back from a trip to Saudi, and I saw the King Abdullah University there. It's the K campus. I mean, they now have 55,000 students in the middle. I hate to say it, middle of the desert, but it's almost what it is. And this campus is almost completely emulated off of Western United States campuses. I mean, it's all Western civilized. The gender cultures are completely transparent, like you wouldn't think in a Muslim nation. Wi-Fi everywhere, very advanced academic curriculums, and really interesting to see, of all places, Riyadh, a major university popping up with major innovation and technology, ideals. And all over the world, this can be emulated to
women can drive on the campus.
Yes,
on the campus.
Just the campus.
Even a more extreme story. My friend Chris Schroeder is a former State Department official. Just got one of the very rare business visas handed out every year for Iran, and just got back from Iran, and said there's a thriving startup community in Tehran. And interestingly, it's a full 50%. It's exactly gender balanced, 50-50, men and women. It turns out Iran has very strong engineering education, including very strong participation from female students, and they're going crazy to start internet companies and mobile companies. They're incredibly frustrated by the difficulty getting to market when literally their country is embargoed. But the enthusiasm and the passion, small little matter of, issues. And of course, there's certain other issues that they're dealing with. But the passion and the energy and the technical training and the entrepreneurial enthusiasm is just as present, he says, there as it is here.
I think part of the lure of Silicon Valley is the potential riches that could be made. We've seen fortunes built. We've seen fortunes destroyed, for that matter. I want to talk a little bit about what's gone on in technology in the public markets recently, and whether or not that's a changed perception of what's going on here. And Pat, I know we talked about it earlier when we were on TV, on my show, but what's your take about what has happened in the past few months when it comes to valuations, and why it is that old technology companies seem to be faring the best? So old technology like IBM and Microsoft, the ones that paid dividends, the ones that were perceived as stodgy and not necessarily as innovative as some of the hotter technology companies.
Yeah, and I sort of break, as you imply, I sort of break tech into three buckets, right? The old tech, HP, IBM, Cisco, et cetera, right? The new tech, of which I'd put VMware in that category, and then the hot tech, right? Very
But you put Dave in that category.
FireEye now.
Right. You're in the hot tech. You're in the hot tech.
Yeah, these very, breakthrough, very fast growth, new category companies. And if you look at valuations across those and what they've done over time, generally old tech is pretty modestly valued, right, compared to earnings and dividend rates, et cetera. New tech, right, has generally held pretty, their valuations have held up fairly well, still fairly highly valued PE for those companies that are on the right side of some of the technology trends. And then we had the hot tech as being insanely valued earlier this year. We did see a correction, so we're only 3/4 insane now as opposed to totally insane, right? But those have just been, through the roof. If you look at tech overall, right, it's not all that highly valued compared to the market, right, in that sense. So this isn't a bubble that the whole thing has gone crazy, but you have seen these different different pockets of tech. And if anything, but if you just look at base dividends, old tech actually isn't a bad investment overall. New tech continuing, where we are, growth, opportunity, but still fairly established companies like VMware today. And then I put my friend Dave here in this, hot tech category that, yeah, maybe they are a little bit overvalued for what the future is.
Still. Even with their significant declines.
Aren't you glad you came?
Can I argue back just
Of course. Please do.
Because it's fun, Pat. No, but a couple things. Number one, I think when you look at some of the hotter tech companies right now, the growth rates are astronomical. I don't know if you saw, we had 132% growth last quarter. This company went from 200 employees to several thousand
employees. You can't be valued that goes on forever, Dave.
And I remember VMware growing kind of like that and having valuations back in the day where those valuations were similar. But the revenue growth multiples versus the PE multiples are very different. And you almost look at where we're trading today, and it's not even sometimes half where it was during the internet bubble days. So you could say, is it fully valued, partially valued, insanely valued? But now you have a much longer, in my opinion, elasticity to this quote-unquote bubble, because we're wider, we're deeper, many more consumers, many more markets we can serve. The internet is so much more advanced at this point. So the growth sustainability for companies in the hot tech can last for years and potentially be, very big, very strong companies for a long period of time. So, how do you value that now in this currency? One man thinks one way, another way. But the point of it is, this is a much bigger, more sustained opportunity than I think it was in 99, 2000, at least one man's view.
The issue that we've seen on Wall Street, at least in investor perception of these hot tech companies, is that there's been a change in what investors are valuing right now. So they are focused more on near-term profitability as opposed to long-term growth, whereas that seesaw was different 3 months ago. Does that change the way, Dave, you interact with Wall Street and analysts and investors in terms of managing expectations or in any sort of interaction that you have in communicating your story?
It does, Melissa. I think you have to be very conscious about the times. And if the times change in 45 days, 90 days, you have to be reactive to that. That doesn't mean you pivot the thing from 100% growth as you're dialed and 0% profitability, but you dial it the right way. At least for a company like ours, we have a very proven cash flow model and profitability model before we sort of entered this fast growth. We had 22 million of cash flow from operations on 83 million of revenue just 2 years ago. And we made a big investment because we saw a massive market opportunity. So we got to pivot a little bit, make sure we're mindful. But my part of me feels in 45 days or 90 days it could pivot back to high growth. Yeah. And we're going to find ourselves right back looking at high multiple companies saying, are they growing? How much are we growing? And if you're taking market share and you're really growing, you're going to get rewarded for that. So
but wouldn't you always take growth at a reasonable gross margin? Wouldn't you always opt for more growth, provided you get a reasonable gross margin on it? Reasonable.
Absolutely. Yeah. And gross margin is a really important early metric. And when you look at companies, I think all of us have been involved with them. We have very high gross margins today. Above software models, because in our case with FireEye, we're a cloud kind of model as well. More than half our business comes ratably, extremely high gross margins. So it's just a matter of managing the P&L in between to drive profitability.
Your margins now, are they 75, 85?
Yeah, 70+% range on a total gross margin basis. And that's with all the investments we've made too. And so, it's an opportunity to create a lot of margin value later on for companies like us.
EMC is in the new tech category as well, along with VMware, I would imagine, Joe. I'm curious, how closely do you watch the stock market? Do you have your stock up on a screen? Do you watch it intraday?
Not every day.
I do.
Basically, you got to play your game. And inside the EMC family, we have the whole, kind of the whole string. On a high end, high growth, high value, we have Pivotal, and we have VMware, we have RSA in the security area, and then of course we have EMC, most noted for storage and information protection. And each one of those is probably in a different category in terms of, I think more of the problem that we have perhaps is understanding having all of those under the same umbrella and how does that get valued as opposed to any individual piece. But I'm a firm believer in that you got to play your game, you got to form a game plan, you got to believe in it, you got to communicate it openly to your customers, to people that work inside the company, and of course to your investors. And it's got to be this, you tell everybody the same story. it's a story you believe in, and you keep executing, and good things will happen over a longer period of time.
In your experience, though, has the game changed in terms of how you interact with the street and investors?
Not that much. I've always been a big fan of, as much transparency as you can. Tell them what you really think, what you're really doing. If it's going to take a while, you say it's going to take a while. And I think if you treat them like that, you get a good result over time. If you look at it every day and you want instant gratification, I'm in the wrong company, in the wrong business. But if you take it over a 5-year period, I'll stand up against anybody and I say, look, here's what we're doing, and it's been good.
With the ups and downs in tech, John, I'm curious, do Stanford students, their perception of a career in technology, does it change with the times?
Right now, it's booming. We have computer science is now our #1 undergraduate major. More than 90% of the undergraduates take the introductory programming course. And lots of students have concluded that they'd rather be computer science with a minor in economics than the reverse. The reverse used to be the model now. So that's really changed. They see lots of career opportunities and broadly applied. So they want to go do political analysis. They're going to get a computer science degree and then do a political science minor or something and go do it because they see technology as the liberating factor.
Are they still teaching Pascal and Fortran and COBOL?
No, Java, C++,
Python.
And you have the diversity of people who are majoring in computer
Yeah, I'm
science?
still struggling. I mean, computer science is the sad story of a discipline that took off with primarily males. Now what's happened is something fascinating. It became dominated by this game culture, right? Shoot as many bad guys as you could. The number of guys coming into the field grew very fast. What's happened now is that social media has become the new driver. Well, that's a technology that women find a lot more interesting. So we're really seeing a rise now in young women coming into computer science after many years when they were missing. Yeah, it's good to see. It's good to see.
Are you seeing that, Mark, in terms of the companies who are coming to pitch you?
Yeah, more and more. I mean, I would say it's probably, we see kind of the shift happening later in the pipeline. And so I'd say we're probably on the lagging side of that, startups broadly and venture capital broadly. But there's no question that having a larger number of female computer science graduates is going to translate directly into having a much larger number of female co-founders. We have a whole series of female co-founders who we're very proud of, but there's no question we could use a lot more. And it sounds like we're going to get them. I
want to ask you about the bubble. And we discussed this on TV as well, but for our audience, we took a look at the performance of some of your portfolio companies over the past 3 months.
She put up a stock chart of all of our stocks that are down, including the ones that we sold like a year ago, which was that was the really nice touch. Yeah. Go ahead.
You expected it to be
a lot of them are down double digits.
Yes.
Just as an example.
Yes.
Was that any sort of a bubble? Does that change what you do in terms of valuation of companies you invest in?
If it was a bubble, I hope that means it's over, so that we can stop talking about it. So it doesn't change a lot. Nothing that's really happened in the last 5 years in this stuff has changed how we invest. I mean, I would say we view ourselves as almost entirely microeconomic investors, not macroeconomic investors. So like the Federal Reserve policy and interest rates and QE, it has no bearing on anything that we do. Talk of a bubble, stock, even stock. The weird thing about our business, venture capital, is like our money is locked up for better or for worse for 10, 15 years. I told Melissa that the name of her show is Fast Money. The name of our show would be Slow Money. And I mean, we have to be we invest in these things, and we're stuck. We're going to be in them for years and years and years. And then even when they go public, we often hold them. And so we're really thinking over a 5 or 10 year time frame. It doesn't really faze us any. The maybe more interesting thing that you might see, and actually you haven't seen yet, is sort of the following, which is in the last, especially year or 2 years. It's gotten far more common for public investors like hedge funds and mutual funds to cross over and buy stakes in private companies. Yeah. And so Tiger Global and Fidelity and T. Rowe Price and Coatue and a whole series of these kind of big public investment management firms have come over, and they've become very active buyers for growth stage private companies. That's the kind of money that you'd expect to get shaken out if there's a downdraft in the stock market, because they're very reactive to the stock market. Actually, in the last 6 months, that money, if anything, has been accelerating into the private market.
So I would think that would increase valuations. Because money's chasing a limited pool of investments.
On margin for the growth stage. On margin for the growth stage, there is more money available now than there was 5 years ago because the money's come over from the public side. But again, the other side of that argument is there is a lot of money, there's a lot of capital in the world that needs to be productively invested to pay for everybody's retirement and everything else, these giant pension funds and so forth. That money, a lot of that money goes into what you might call value stocks, and they want dividends, but some of that money looks for growth. There are a relatively small number of fast-growing companies in the stock market, but it has become far more common for fast-growing private companies to wait much longer to go public. And so it's gotten harder to deploy a lot of capital into growth in the public market. And so it does make sense that more of that money is going to shift over into the private side. And what's interesting, back to your original question, is that process has not slowed down in the wake of these stocks falling. For better or for worse, that is continuing.
So when I read about various venture capital partners saying, absolutely, we discuss this in boardrooms, valuation, what's going on in the stock market comes up all the time. That's not happening at Andreessen Horowitz.
Oh, we talk about it constantly.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's always around. Yeah.
You're just not making
private
on
Right.
that stuff.
Oh, yeah. No, look, we talk about all this stuff all the time. It's just, we don't talk about the Federal Reserve all the time, but we talk about tech stocks, and we talk about, we talk about all these issues. We track the capital flows very carefully. We talk to all the hedge funds and mutual funds all the time. We try to understand how the public market investors are thinking and feeling. It's just, you can't, I don't think you can underestimate the extent, the 2000 crash really caused a significant change to how fast companies go public, and they just go public later, and which is one of these things that happens then, which is these companies go public later, and a lot of the growth has already happened by the time they go public, right? And so you have this question, if you're the new public market investor, of how much growth is there. Some companies like FireEye continue to grow. Other companies go public as their growth rates are slowing. And the more the IPOs are delayed, I mean, in a sense, it's fine for us because we're happy to hold the companies over a longer period of time in the private market. But the longer it takes for companies to go private, in general, the less growth there will be in the public market, and so that money has to cross over. It has to go for growth.
One man's view, just to add on to what Marc said, I almost wish I would start my career all over again, because the opportunity we're facing right now is just amazing. I'm sure everybody here would say it. I mean, I was saying about it being deeper and wider than ever. I mean, just looking at the opportunities to reach the countries. When I first started my career, we largely would sell to the Western world markets. The Chinese markets, the Asian markets weren't available to us. The Eastern European markets, the Middle Eastern markets. The number of countries we can sell to, the size of the companies we can sell to, the number of industries we can sell to has all expanded dramatically. So when you kind of look at the opportunities I think companies are facing now, it's really interesting, because I think we have years and years to come. Facing a major crisis or not having a major crisis, we're going to see a very steady, I think, long-term 5 or 10-year horizon for tech growth. And the innovation is going to come from all over the world for all countries involved, and it's just expanding. And just 10 years ago, it was probably half or less than it is already today. And that's why we're bullish about what we're seeing, but very interesting climate we're in right now, and the cycles are faster. There's a lot more quicker innovation cycles. You have to be on your toes. R&D becomes really critical today, and it becomes most important in these high upswing cycles, because what I call A&I doesn't work as well, which is acquisition and integration. Very difficult to acquire companies because the valuations are very high, so you have to innovate. You have to use your engineering talent and the people around the world that you have to innovate, or you get less behind because the innovation cycles catch you and pass you.
Can we still have that trajectory, though, of globalization and growth and technology globally if we are having run-ins with China? I mean, today the headlines are incredible. China's accusing Cisco of being in cahoots with the US government. China is investigating whether or not IBM servers are being used to spy on their domestic banks, and are considering replacing those servers with local brand servers. Is that a headwind to technology's global growth, Pat?
Well, I think unquestionably this entire cycle that we're in, we have to look at it as a black eye on the U.S. Right? Clearly there was this, almost benevolent technological leadership that was bestowed upon the U.S. Right? And as we exercise that across the world, it was just, fabulous. Right, for global growth, global opportunity, right? And many of the top tech companies, as a result, emerge from the United States. And, an implication of Snowden and all these other implications comes back as a black eye to the U.S. and by implication on U.S. IT. Obviously, it affects every company, right, worldwide, as they look to, what do I do now for the operations of my cloud in my country? How do I manage, my local privacy and requirements? And I think it affects U.S. IT, period, across the board. 10 years from now, I believe Snowden and all of those disclosures will be the single most significant event of 2013 as we look back, right, on the implications of what happened in 2013. Now, for us, we're actually well positioned. Right, we sell software, we enable people to operate, private clouds, local clouds in their data centers, on their networks, with their people and local companies. So we are well positioned in that regard, but it affects everybody, right? And I think all of IT, US IT has a bit of restoration, right, of the credibility on a worldwide market, right, as these allegations, I think, aren't over yet, right? And they're continuing to go back and forth because it's not just China, it's across the world.
Joe, do you think this is the hot button issue that Silicon Valley cares greatly about, but the White House doesn't seem to?
First of all, if you take the Snowden issue, which started all this up, I think there's two sides to that. Obviously, it was a message to the world that trust has been breached, and we couldn't look good to anybody. Right? But I think more underneath that, it's going to be a cry for transparency. And underneath that, there's going to be a cry for saying, hey, there's something big happening here. This might be an opportunity for me, whether it be China or whether it be a European country, to actually say, how do I participate in this cloud, big data, mobile, using a little bit of this event, which was not a good event, but this event, for my own purposes to say, look, I get a little more protectionist. And when you think of any company, I mean, from an IT standpoint, the things of value are their application and their data, right? So this gives them an opportunity to say, hey, maybe I want to run my own data and not let these big bad American companies come in and just continually own, take the third platform of IT like they did it in the client server era, like they did in the mainframe era, these major shifts. So I think you're seeing a blend of real issues, transparency, as I said, breach of trust, real issues being melded in somehow with kind of maybe the tip of the iceberg is those issues, and then the real issue is how do I help my country participate in this next boom? Because if you think of any industry, there's no industry that can accomplish much of any innovation without the use of IT. So it is so fundamentally important, and taking advantage of that and trying to level the playing field a bit, I think, is what you see going on here. And are we playing that absolutely perfect from a, U.S. point of view? No, we're not. But I don't want to throw a lot of stones here.
Well, you actually gave the administration a D- prior to the indictment of the 5 PLA members.
Why did you give them a passing grade at all, Marc?
Well, what would your grade be, John?
I'd give them an
Professor
F.
Hennessy.
I'd give them an F.
Of course.
I mean, forget about the fact that Snowden told everybody that there were a lot of things going on that Americans had no idea that were going on. Secondly, there's a relatively low-level consultant that has full access to all the information inside NSA. Would you trust them with your personal information in that circumstance? And third, we've lost our moral standing. The situation with China and cyber attacks on many companies here in the Valley, how does the U.S. stand up and say, this is wrong, you can't do this, you have to stop this, when in fact now the U.S. is being accused of doing exactly the same thing to those countries? I think it's a disaster.
Go ahead, Marc. You want
No,
to go first?
I was
Surprised Marc's getting to be a soft grader.
I am. I'm going to give me a softie
Curve.
No, I agree with John. I mean, so the other thing I would bring up, building on what Joe said, I think the other one threat is that one implication is the potential damage to the American tech industry, which by the way is not good for America. It's also actually not good for the American intelligence agencies, oddly enough. It's not, because it's not like the American intelligence community is better off if the dominant tech companies globally are not American. In any event, the other threat is the internet balkanization, which in the long run may be an even bigger problem. And I think the exact dynamic Joe described is happening, which is there are countries, every country in the world basically looks at the internet, and they look at the American model of the internet where there's the free flow of information and people can do whatever they want. Then they look at the Chinese model of the internet, and they look at the Great Firewall of China, and they look at the level of censorship and the level of control and the level of protectionism to foster their domestic companies. And they look between the two, and until now the American model has been the dominant model. A lot of companies, a lot of administrations, the Putin administration is one prominent example, look at the Chinese model and they're like, boy, that looks pretty good. They have not had a reason to be able to do the shift, and now they do. Now they can use this whole incident and affair as domestic political cover to impose controls on their own citizens. And that, I think, is bad for the American internet business. I think it's bad for the American economy. And it's certainly bad for the citizens of those countries.
And perhaps bad for innovation everywhere.
Yeah, bad for the free flow of information. And that's if I'm depressed about anything, that's the one.
Yeah.
Melissa, I was gonna comment on something that Pat said as well, which is if you take a step back for a minute and just kind of look at what's happening, you know, you sort of have history repeating itself a little bit. If you study sort of conflicts that have occurred, every time a new domain gets discovered, we end up, by human nature, conflicting over that domain. And whether it's, you know, finding new lands or oceans or air or space, we end up as civilization conflicting over that. Cyber domain is no different. You know, we have a new domain, but it has a new dimension to it too, which is anonymity and no governance model to it. So what happens is the superpowers are realizing that this domain is incredibly, incredibly powerful. So one of the byproducts of what's happening right now is you're getting balkanization effects to their internet infrastructures because nationalism's creeping in as the psyche is realizing that this domain is completely, you know, critical to infrastructure of their country. The United States is no different. The United States actually has one of the worst problems in this domain because all of our innovation has created a bit of an Achilles heel, which is this very platform of wonderful technology coming out of Silicon Valley has made it a perfect platform to attack because there's not much security being built into the social networks or the mobile computing devices or the cloud computing capabilities that we have. So some of these superpowers, because they can hide behind anonymity, are able to very easily target us. Social network, I find out what address you are, I put a payload to you, I can steal your credentials, I can log in and you in the network. And so we're finding a very interesting period. And what Pat said was, we're going to look back, in my opinion, on this year and maybe just the next 12, 24 months as maybe a very defining period in mankind over cyber. Because we're elevating sort of DEFCON levels one step by a step in a bad direction. The indictments of the Chinese military officials, you know, for espionage is a first in history. Indictments for treason, Snowden. You know, we're watching a tit for tat kind of occurring across major superpowers with Russia and China and the United States. It's pretty dangerous right now. So I don't know if I give the policy a D- or an F, but we have to improve the policy dramatically, or we're going to continue to see stealing, potentially conflict, destruction that can occur, especially as the Irans and Syrias and some of the Middle Eastern markets become online with much greater capability. So an interesting window. If we don't solve it, technology could really get hurt, so could Silicon Valley.
So all of you guys are pretty much on the same page, it sounds like. Do you feel like what you're saying is falling on deaf ears when it comes to the administration? I mean, this is an administration who comes out to Silicon Valley to fundraise. They hold expensive dinners, and they expect you guys to write big checks. But when it comes to one of the biggest issues, you guys say in the next 12 to 24 months for technology, you guys are giving them an F or a D-, whatever it is. It's not passing. Pat?
Well, I think from the U.S. government perspective, this is an entirely different challenge. They're somewhat embarrassed over NSA, embarrassed over Snowden. They're trying to deal with the public policy issues they have. It's uncharted territory in many respects. And while D-, F associated with it, it's a very difficult position because not only they have to reestablish their position to the U.S. people, right? They have to reestablish their position to the world. Right, and then they have to decide the policies by which they're going to govern tech, right, as well. So this is a most precarious position, and I think the characterization here, right, from our lens is, it's not meeting our needs, right, but this is a pretty tough set of circumstances that they find themselves in on many, many different fronts.
I think they have two real big problems, Melissa. One is they don't have enough technical expertise. It certainly doesn't exist in Congress, and it doesn't exist mostly outside of the NSA and a few of the security agencies. They don't know what's really happening, what's protected information, and what's not, right? I mean, the more we discover about Snowden, the more we found out he had access to everything. I think that's part A. Part B is they're being asked to weigh a very difficult set of issues. Possibility of another terrorist attack versus long-term damage to the U.S. leadership in technology and innovation, and the economic growth that goes along with that. How do you weigh those? That's a really difficult thing, particularly for people who come from a national defense mindset.
I want to unpack this notion of internet balkanization for your portfolio companies, because you are investing in these startups that I would imagine hope to do business overseas, and particularly in China. Walk us through the implication of that.
Well, to be clear, American internet companies, for the most part, have been unable to do business in China. Like, there's just flat-out protectionism. Chinese-American companies are able to do business in the U.S., and so there is just an asymmetry. And up until now, it's been fine. It's been okay, fine. Like, we'd like to go into China someday, but the rest of the world is a big place, and it's fine for now. The problem is, if you start taking more countries off the board, you start, I don't want to name names specifically, but you start taking European countries off the board, you start taking significant Latin American countries off the board. You go from this kind of marvelous thing we've had in Silicon Valley and on the internet, where you can have 4 kids with their laptops, have users in 170 countries in the first 12 months, to, I don't know, like, how many countries does it, in 5 years or 10 years we're sitting here, is that 150 countries or, 4 countries? And like I said, I think the big issue is this dovetails with domestic desires in many other countries to assert control over their own citizens and over their own economy and over the internet that is just, like, flat out unhealthy for everybody, including those citizens. And so the threat is real. The big internet companies, in a sense, have an easier way to deal with this, which is they can deal with money, which is, one of the demands now, for example, in Europe, increasingly, is that if you're going to operate, for an American internet company operating in Europe, you have to, the implication sort of where things are going is you'll have to put servers on the ground in every country, data centers on the ground in every country. And so if you're, a big internet company, you can afford to do that. Startups certainly can't.
Right. Now, behind the 5 indictments of the PLA members is your company, Dave, Mandiant. It was a report generated by Mandiant that led to that.
Yeah.
Are your products, Dave, being used by other governments to detect U.S. spying on them?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we're finding an amazing amount of opportunity for our products all over the world. In fact, I think we're deployed in 56 military intelligence operations, countries around the world. Because essentially, FireEye invented a new cyber radar system. It's probably the best way to describe it. We're just tracking missiles on the network versus in the air. So we're very actively selling all over the world. There's some countries we can't sell to, clearly. The Department of Commerce restricts that, but we're very heavily involved. We see a lot of very egregious activities all over the world today. A lot of skirmishes happening, kind of North Korea, South Korea, kind of the Russian Crimea, Ukraine world, the Middle Eastern world. You're seeing a lot of regional conflicts, and then you're seeing the superpower conflicts that are occurring as well. It's an interesting state of things, but at least for a security vendor, it's helping a bit too.
Have you noticed an uptick in events that you've detected since the indictments or since this whole thing started getting escalated? Has there been more of a tit for tat than maybe we, the public, even know about?
Let's just say that it's massive. I don't even know how else to say it. It almost sounds like a fireman crying fire sometimes with what I do, but it's just amazing. We've been seeing now over 20 major military intelligence operations in China now. And this isn't just the 3 PLA, the General Bureau, the 61398 unit that was indicted, but you're seeing them across the MSS, across multiple divisions of the Army and Navy. You're seeing just major groups, thousands of cyber sort of warriors being trained and created in that market. That's not terribly different than what we're seeing elsewhere around the world too, mind you. But no, we haven't seen a change post the indictments. If anything, my biggest fear is we're going to see a major retaliation, much like occurred with the Snowden incident post the scenarios that occurred with the APT1 report. So we're just seeing sort of this one step at a time process that's occurring, which is dangerous. We need a coalition between the countries. We need to settle down and figure out what peace can be in cyber. That's going to be good for everyone. And this crime's got to stop. We're seeing major theft and stealing of intellectual property in nearly every country. Quick statistics for you. We put out a report just the other day, just to give you an idea. We took 1,217 companies across 67 countries, and we put FireEye's product in for the very first time. And what we discovered was that 98% of them were breached. So when I mean breached, I mean data exfiltration occurring. So 1,217 large companies, 67 countries, and nearly 100% of them were spewing out data out of their networks. Pretty amazing situation we're in. And who are they up against? Highly trained, sophisticated military and intelligence operations. They don't stand a chance. So it's very difficult for security operations at a Target or an eBay to fight against what they're up against right now, because they're just, the offense and defense are highly dislocated, and it's very difficult to track it. But that's a state we're in, and that's why this deterrent could create a headwind for growth. Scary.
I'm going to switch gears a little bit because we're almost out of time. And again, we would invite you to think of questions you want to ask. But before we get to those, I just want to go down the line and ask you guys what tech trend you're most excited about for the next 5 years here in the Valley. Marc, we'll start with you.
Let's see. How to narrow it down.
Exactly.
I mean, we've just been tremendously enthusiastic about Bitcoin, and so I've nominated. We think it's a revolution in financial technology. We think the implications will take 20 years to play out, but we're investing strongly against it, and we're going hard at it.
Pat?
Well, I've called it SOMO, CLOBAD, or SMAC, Social, Mobile, Analytics, and Cloud. Right, and that forms a foundation.
I think you sort of cheated. You've melded like 4 things into one.
Everything.
Well,
let me continue for a second. Are you going to let me finish my point?
It's your campus.
Okay,
you do
thank you. Thank you. Right, but when you think about those, they provide a foundation for so many things to occur on top of it. And whether that's going to be healthcare and biotech, using big data and mobile devices, whether it's going to be changing, right, automotive and how that's done, whether it enables, Google Glasses because they're connected to things across the world. It's those foundational infrastructure things that are going to have explosive opportunities across almost every domain. And that's what's so exciting about this period that we're in, right? We're disrupting everything about IT, and that's enabling us to disrupt every other industry as well.
John?
So I think this is the true coming of age of AI. I think finally, after decades and decades of investment, we're seeing systems which can learn tremendous amounts of information, deploy lots of computing power, and actually do something that amounts to common sense reasoning, which we've never really been able to do before. And I think it's going to be a very exciting period for finally getting a computer that can do things that a really good assistant can do, for example, which we haven't gotten to yet.
Joe?
I think it's around the fact that telemetry sensors are being built into almost everything imaginable, from thermostats to cars. You just name it, it's being built in, clothing. And I think the ability to capture that huge amount of data, ingest it in a reasonable amount of time, then reason over it and act on it in real time will change every business model. Marc's deferred to it as the software-defined businesses of the future. And I think every corporation, every government entity, every entity in the world is going to be disrupted or at least changed dramatically by that factor.
Dave?
Maybe just playing off what Joe said, something that's been a fascinating trend for me is to watch sort of the formation of what I think of as Internet 2.0. Just to bear with me. What you're finding now is orbiting satellites and terrestrial satellites are creating an amazing uplink model for the Internet. So if you think about the way the world has worked, primarily in the past, we've had mostly ground transponders for Internet access, a few satellites, but nearly everything is connecting uplink. I'm actually on Delta Airlines board, and one of the things, every airplane is being equipped now with uplink transponders instead of ground link transponders. Why? Because the access and the bandwidth from the uplink transponders are so much bigger pipes to the ground. And so we can put 50 megs of pipe to every seat on every plane. And what does that mean? We can start streaming content in any variety form from these orbiting satellites. So the infrastructure changes that's occurring with all these terrestrial satellites is amazing. The Viasats and Telesats of the world, all these great companies are building an amazing new internet structure that basically is constantly orbiting, constantly online, and has a tremendous increase of bandwidth that we've never seen before. Connect to your watch, to your clothing, to everything that you have. And it's IPv6 enabled, which means you now have a magnitude more addressable elements to it. So just very interesting to watch that trend. And almost every day you're watching a satellite launch occurring from somewhere in the world to put more access up in the sky for us to be able to have all the things we like connected all the time.
All right. Anybody have any questions out there? Don't be shy. Right here. What? Since the mic is coming from there.
Hey guys, great panel. Question to all you guys is talk about the culture of Silicon Valley over the years. One question I have specifically is, obviously there's an HBO special out there. All my friends say, is that how Silicon Valley really is? I saw Social Network. So there's a real black eye for Silicon Valley and this culture that we're in. So explain to me in your definition, your version of the truth, if you will. Going back to Silicon Valley's heritage, going back generations, and what's good and what's bad, and what would you like to see get rid of?
Well, I think the Valley's always been driven by a vision of people who want to change the world. And that's been the driver, and I think it remains the driver. I think you see the young people going out there, they want to change the world. A lot of increasingly social entrepreneurs as well as conventional entrepreneurs. And I think that if that's the driver, if people are determined to change the world and do something good, then everything will be fine. If people are focusing on money and short-term outcome and fame in another way, then we will have a problem. We won't be the leadership place in the world anymore.
John, I just had a boot camp, right? Which is right after our new hires, right? We send them through boot camp so they know how to program, they know our systems, all this kind of stuff. And they have a little bit of a competition at the end of this. And so I had lunch with the winning team. Not that I think having lunch with me is all that much of a prize, but right, they're excited to have lunch with me. So we have lunch with the winning team. And one of the women on one of the team, she was anxious to know how she could start her own company in the Valley because she had a dream. It's like, you just finished boot camp. How can you be starting your company already?
Would you be willing to flip her my business card?
No, absolutely not. Right, but there's this passion, right? But there's just an inherent passion that, right, I'm some foreign national. I've showed up here to go to school. I'm getting my credentials, and I'm going to do something amazing in this place of the Valley. And there's such a culture for that passionate innovation that it really is quite phenomenal. And I don't think that has been replicated, if we go back in the beginning of our panel, anywhere else in the world. And I think that's still what makes this unique.
Have you seen the HBO series?
I love that show.
Is it accurate?
I'm like the only one of my friends who loves that show. So, so I have been. This is the Mike Judge show. Like I swear, I have met every single one of those people, and I have been in every single one of those meetings. So, I would say it's actually a fantastic show. Actually, Mike Judge the creator of the show, actually started his career as a Silicon Valley engineer, actually as a semiconductor engineer, and so he actually knows from which he speaks. So, look, the show it's a satire, right? It's a parody, and so it exaggerates all the makes everything funny. But at the core of that show, the reason I actually like that show a lot is that the core of that show is a kid who has a vision. He actually wants to he has an actual breakthrough technology, and he actually wants to start a company around it. And he runs the gauntlet. I mean, just even in the first 8 episodes, he runs the gauntlet of all the stuff that's happened to him happens to all of our founders. And there's an enormous amount of willpower and determination required to run that gauntlet and get out and get through to the other side. And he's it's a comedy, so he's stumbling his way through it. But these entrepreneurs, these founders, they do stumble their way through it, and he's gaining confidence as he goes, and he's starting to build his company, and he's starting to create jobs, and he's on his way. And so I actually think at the core of that show is actually what makes Silicon Valley special.
Other questions? Right here in the middle.
So John Chambers at Cisco put up this provocative slide last week that showed some of the growth rates or lack of growth rates at the big IT vendors, HP, IBM, Oracle, and basically predicted that some of the companies that he listed would be out of business in a few years. And I wonder if you guys agree with him, and if you'd be willing to make any predictions of who would be the going out of business list.
Was Cisco on his list of the companies that would still be around, or would go out of business?
It was his slide.
He said Cisco would be fine.
Cisco would be fine. Okay, all right. Good. Yeah, okay.
Joe, why don't you tackle that?
The only guy here that's a good friend of John, so. Let me put it this way. I do think you're going to see some consolidation as we go through this next wave to the third platform of IT, as it's being called, this social, mobile, big data, social, mobile world. That's for sure. And if that's what John was alluding to, I agree. I don't see those big companies going out of business, my own opinion.
Look, I think the real problem, what's the challenge? The challenge for a company is how do you continue a growth rate once you reach a certain size? That is the fundamental challenge. It becomes harder to find acquisitions that move the needle as you get bigger and bigger because you're at a much larger scale. And organic innovation somehow seems to be more difficult to maintain. And whether you're Intel or Cisco or Microsoft or any of these companies, that's the really hard thing to do. And I don't think anybody's discovered the magic formula yet.
As we go from the second era, right, the client-server era, into the mobile cloud era of computing, this is a dramatic shift, right? In this old tech, new tech, right, hot tech perspective. This is the most dramatic time in the history of IT. We're seeing the shift of consumer IT, of enterprise IT, going through this period of disruption. There's unquestionably going to be major consolidations that occur as a result of those disruptions, whether it's growth-driven, whether it's collapse. Because seriously, a lot of those companies are going to be in negative growth territory right, going forward, just because companies have to reduce their on-premise spend as they go invest in their mobile cloud environments. This is a disruptive period, and to that degree, there will be companies that we know and love, right, that won't be under their current formation as we go forward. This is a very disruptive time.
What does that mean exactly? Companies we know and love that won't be under their current formation?
Well, just think about the last couple of years, right? You know, who would have predicted Nokia, right, going away? Right, who would have said that BMC was going to go private? Who would have said Dell was going to go private? Right. I mean, these disruptions, right, you know, BlackBerry situation, I mean, these are very successful companies just a few years ago, right, that all of a sudden, right, are being formed in entirely new ways.
Well, look at IBM. Talk about a company that's completely changed itself. It used to be the technology leader across the board in the computer industry, and now it's just retreated from a lot of those areas, and I think it did it to create a new business model.
Other questions on this side, maybe? Nope, okay.
Thanks. This is for the CEOs. What is the one thing you think your companies could do, you know, absent government action of any kind, to increase the pipeline of young female people who are interested in tech, to create a pipeline for future employment?
Well, you know, speaking for VMware, right, you know, we have our VM Women initiative that we launched fairly recently, right, because part of it is that we want to go work with the Stanfords and the others to really encourage those early generation. We want to capture more than our fair share of them. We want to keep them technical, so encourage, mentor them along the way, right, really see that their careers are being more advanced, right, because generally they've been less advanced, right, male versus female. So we're taking all of those, you know, micro inequities, all of those things that encourage that continuing progress, and also doing it globally, right, because there's very different patterns as you go across the world of the role of women in tech as well. So it requires all of those factors, and you do all of those really hard, and it takes a long time to move the needle because we are so far underwater. You know, less than 20% of graduates into technical fields are female. Right? And if we're all scrapping over the same 20% that's deteriorating, right, as opposed to inflating over time, it's a hard challenge.
I think, you know, role models are needed. And I'm really encouraged. I think when you look and you see, you know, Meg Whitman leading HP, and you see Ginny Rometty leading IBM, and you see Melissa Meyer leading Yahoo, and there's others. I think that bodes very positively because everybody you look up in life, as a rule. And when you have the role models, and I think the universities are doing a lot of the right things now also, I think you're going to see this problem addressed. And you know, these things take 10 years, but we're well on our way. I don't know what you think, John.
We got to reach further back into the system. You know, in middle school, girls are actually ahead of boys in terms of math, testing, and various other things. And then it somehow gets lost. We've got to get girls, as they're developing, really focused on the opportunities in this industry. They got to get out and see that it's not really a Dilbert world. There really is. It's really teamwork. You don't sit in a cubicle all day with a bag over your head and program, right? It's teamwork. The team's working together. It's skills like that. And if we can break down that perception and say this is really about doing things for people, I think then we can inspire young women, very young, still in high school and middle school, to pursue careers in tech.
I can't agree more with what John and Joe and Pat said, but you know, I think the role model is critical, just quintessential to all of this. And I think when you look at organizations, we probably could use, in my opinion, more governance to help drive diversification at many levels. And what we notice is when we do have some of that governance, it happens. And maybe there's a shortage here or there, but it will happen. And you know, I find the yin and yang of both male and female, as well as you know other race and ethnic backgrounds and sexuality, really critical for cultures here in Silicon Valley. I have 4 very strong women execs on my team. I have openly homosexual man on my team. We have a lot of diversification. I'm almost the United Nations of personnel from various countries. And it's amazing how that nurtures the role models, I think, for cultures, because suddenly more women are attracted to the company, more other backgrounds are attracted to the company. And we didn't have any governance to do it, but I think there could be some elevation of governance to drive that just a little bit more and create that, my view.
About an elevation of governance, are you talking about an organization among your companies?
No, not necessarily. What I think of governance is I think about Glass Lewis, ISS, and other sort of lobbying bodies and proxy bodies that could put a little more weight onto those controls in a way that could encourage people to have a little bit more optics for that. And we have some of that today, and it comes through, but just another small notch, because you often find companies will just gravitate to whatever the leader and the CEO is doing. Sometimes they just surround themselves with people like themselves. So just a little more control, in order to diversify is a good thing. I think it's good for the shareholders personally. I think it's good for the company and the cultures. You won't find a lot of people arguing with that, but not everybody likes more governance, trust me. But at the same time, just a little bit could really encourage.
Well, we need more diversity on boards too. The Valley is not a great place to look at in terms of board diversity. We need to get more leadership and more diversity in our boards.
We're just about out of time, but thank you all for being on this panel. Some great insights today. Thank you, Dave DeWalt, Joe Tucci, John Hennessy, Pat Gelsinger, and Marc Andreessen. And thank you all for attending. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Melissa.
Very good.